Web Slinger, Wall Crawler, Spidey, Underoos. He may have a lot of nicknames, but the Marvel superhero created by Stan Lee and the late Steve Ditko is best known around the world as Spider-Man. Since his first appearance in 1962's Amazing Fantasy 15, Spider-Man has gone on to become one of the most popular and commercially successful superheroes of all time, appearing in Hollywood blockbusters, numerous television series, and even his own Broadway musical. And while most of his adventures into different mediums have come and gone, there's still one where the webheads had a constant presence since the early 1980s: video games. Spider-Man has appeared in 30-plus games across over 15 different gaming platforms. There was a 10-year stretch between 2004 and 2014 where a Spider-Man game came out every single year. He has appeared in more video games than any other comic book character in history. With 2018 bringing us Spider-Man PS4 by Insomniac Games, which looks more and more incredible by the day, the Web Slinger's prominence in gaming is bigger than it's ever been before. In order to appreciate how far Spidey's video games have come, it's important to see how they began, as we swing our way through Spider-Man's gaming history. Spider-Man first appeared in 1982's Spider-Man for the Atari 2600. It was the first video game based on a Marvel comic, and features our hero climbing buildings with his webs while fending off the Green Goblin. Though simple in its premise, Spider-Man's video game debut was meaningful because it appeared on the Atari 2600, which many people consider the foundation for gaming today. From Pitfall all the way to Fortnite, Spider-Man has been here through it all. In 1984, he appeared in Quest Probe, a trilogy of games featuring Marvel superheroes on the Apple II, Commodore 64, and several other platforms. Then, in 1989, he appeared in The Amazing Spider-Man and Captain America in Doctor Doom's Revenge, a side-scrolling action game for the Amiga, Atari ST, and Amstrad CPC, among others, that came with an exclusive comic book packaged with the game. But besides a brief appearance as a boss in The Revenge of Shinobi for the Sega Genesis, those first three games were all that we saw of the Web Slinger during the early beginnings of the video game boom. That all changed with the 90s. Not only did we get Pokemon, Final Fantasy VII, and Justin Timberlake, but we got 14 Spider-Man games in 6 years. The Marvel Comics mascot was free from console exclusivity at the time, appearing on the Game Boy, NES, Super Nintendo, Genesis, Game Gear, Sega CD, Master System, 32X, and even arcades. Spider-Man was everywhere, in both video games and pop culture, and he would only grow more popular with time. After a 4-year gap between game appearances, 2000 saw Spidey come swinging back onto consoles in a big way with Neversoft's Spider-Man for the original PlayStation. Showered in critical acclaim on release, Spider-Man is considered one of the best games starring the Web Slinger. It was ported to everything from the Nintendo 64 to the Game Boy Color, and followed up by 2 direct sequels the following year, with Taurus Games' Spider-Man 2: The Sinister Six, and Vicarious Visions' Spider-Man 2: Enter Electro, the first ever Sony-exclusive Spider-Man game for the PlayStation. A standalone game, Spider-Man Mysterio's Menace, also released in 2001 during the first few months of the Game Boy Advance's lifespan. Spidey would go on to appear in 6 more games on the GBA, with every new Spider-Man game receiving a unique version for Nintendo's handheld. Expanding further and further outside his comic book beginnings, Spidey made his big screen debut in 2002 with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man film starring Tobey Maguire, which would go on to become the highest grossing Spider-Man film ever and redefine the summer blockbuster. The film was so immensely popular that it spawned 2 equally successful sequels and grossed over $1 billion across 3 films. It was this success that would also lead to the creation of Spider-Man's first movie tie-in game. Developed by Treyarch and published by Activision, Spider-Man the movie was loosely based on the film and featured voice acting by Tobey Maguire.
Yikes! Not so fast.
It released in 2002 for the GameCube, PC, PlayStation 2, Xbox, and Game Boy Advance, and began the trend of a new Spider-Man game coming out with every film in the blockbuster series. 2004's Spider-Man 2 is no exception to the movie tie-in label, but its realistic take on Manhattan and open-world web-slinging gameplay earned it a historical reverence, often mentioned by nostalgic gamers when asked what their favorite Spider-Man game of all time is. Spider-Man 2 was the first game to really make you feel like you were Spider-Man, and its legacy is a contributing factor to the overwhelmingly positive reception of Spider-Man PS4's reveal. Even now, 14 years later, I still remember playing Spider-Man 2 on my friend's new PS2, and I still remember what it felt like to swing through New York for the first time and actually feel like I was a superhero. Treyarch nailed the gameplay mechanics and showed the gaming world what superhero games could be. Then, for some reason, Activision continued to publish Spider-Man game after Spider-Man game, but never again used the mechanics that made 2004's game so iconic. 2005's Ultimate Spider-Man, co-developed by Vicarious Visions and Treyarch, was generally well received, but featured clunkier traversal that lacked the exhilarating feeling the previous game did so well. 2006's Spider-Man Battle for New York for the Nintendo DS, Game Boy Advance, and mobile was met with middling reviews upon release, and 2007 saw two more disappointments with both the Spider-Man 3 movie tie-in as well as a game called Spider-Man Friend or Foe. The tie-in game for Spider-Man 3 failed to live up to the expectations set by Spider-Man 2, resulting in a product that was inferior to its predecessor both graphically and gameplay-wise. Spider-Man Friend or Foe, on the other hand, was a retelling of the movie trilogy, but with a more comedic tone. It had a cool co-op multiplayer mode and included the ability to recruit famous Marvel heroes and villains, but gameplay was largely repetitive and easy. This mixed reception underlined an inherent problem with what Spider-Man games had become since 2004's Spider-Man 2, as well as an issue that has plagued the IP up until now. Spider-Man games weren't being made with the intent of being great, industry-defining games. They were made because Spider-Man is incredibly marketable, and all it takes is slapping his image on the box to sell copies. But as long as the game wasn't a complete dumpster fire, Activision and Marvel would be happy. That isn't to say that Spider-Man games released between 2004 and now have been terrible. On the contrary, most games were met with average to positive critical reception. And since Activision published a new Spider-Man game every year since, you guessed it, 2004's Spider-Man 2, they must have been making enough money to get comfortable and stop innovating with the IP. What's baffling is that the imagination and freedom that made earlier games so loved were abandoned in favor of pumping out movie tie-ins, mobile games, and even an endless runner. Again, that's not to say that these are all bad games, they're just uninspired. 2018's Spider-Man, developed by Insomniac Games for the PS4, looks to change that in a big way. The first console-exclusive Spider-Man game in 17 years, Insomniac's latest is a culmination of everything they've learned since their early days on the PlayStation, as well as their adventures with Spyro, Ratchet & Clank, and the Resistance trilogy. Even more influential yet is their 2014 Xbox One exclusive, Sunset Overdrive, which features a frantic and insanely fluid traversal system that sees the player jumping, wall running, grinding, and ziplining their way through the environment while taking out enemies in style. Insomniac proved with Sunset Overdrive that they could create an open-world game that was not only fun to move around in, but made you feel like you were a superhero. Now, 4 years later, Insomniac's take on the web-slinger is poised to redefine the superhero video game once again. It features a massive open-world Manhattan packed full of side quests to do and places to explore. Its story stars not only Spider-Man, but his true identity as Peter Parker, and sees his character's everyday life clashing with his crime-fighting, suit-wearing one. Several iconic villains from the comics make appearances, and the whole experience seems to play out like a movie, Uncharted style. Most exciting of all, however, is that web swinging is back in a big way. Insomniac has taken their time to nail the freedom and exhilaration of flying through the New York City skyline, weaving between buildings and climbing any obstacle, once again making the player feel like they really are Spider-Man. It's this feeling that has fueled the unstoppable hype and made this one of the most anticipated games of 2018, a game that could move more PS4s for Sony than any other game they released this year, God of War included. For fans who've been waiting 14 long years for another game like Spider-Man 2, I'm happy to say that the wait is almost over. Insomniac's Spider-Man releases September 7th, 2018, exclusively for the PlayStation 4. If you like this video, help support Pop Cultra so we can make even more of them. Visit patreon.com/popcultra and pledge just $1 a month for 3-day early access to YouTube videos and podcast episodes.